But I think that message that we were here to serve them, not for them to serve us, which is usually the case in many institutions. In many institutions, it's, we're here, you come and at our dictate, we'll decide what you want to do or not want to do, but we'll do it. This time we wanted them to be, to be participatory in the process, and so I think that helped.
Late 1970s, Jimmy Carter was president. The environmental movement was in full swing. So was a relatively unknown musical movement we would later come to know as hip-hop. Bruce Babbitt was Arizona's governor, and Alfredo Gutierrez was only a few years into his storied political career. In Phoenix, agriculture was still king, though residential and transportation development was changing the way the city looked. While Phoenix grew, so did the Maricopa Community College District, an expansive system of what were then called junior colleges, stretching to all corners of the city. Well, almost all corners. South Phoenix remained a forgotten rural area. Left behind by the burgeoning highway system and landlocked by the constant flooding of the Salt River, South Phoenix seemed a relic of long since forgotten days gone by. Throughout the 20th century, Phoenicians of color faced racist housing and banking restrictions, limiting their opportunities to build, buy, or rent property north of the Salt River. At the same time, industrial and suburban development encroached on the community's claims to space. This historically poor community was about to become poorer.
See, South Mountain as a community had only gravel streets. There was no paved streets. There was no hospital. The hospital hadn't been really finished yet. They got one later, which is really more in Phoenix along the river. Okay. Also, the rivers were a problem too, because the Salt River had weakened some of the strength and hardiness of some of the bridges.
And yet the community flourished. Black, Asian, and Hispanic business owners created networks and communal claims to the neighborhood.
Well, when I was growing up, everyone out here was family. You were related basically to everyone because everyone helped each other. If a lady had a baby, the entire neighborhood pitched in. If someone, just say, fell on hard times, you would not know it because everyone took care of everyone else. I grew up in a time to where, you've heard the saying, it takes a village to raise a child. Yeah, I think all of South Phoenix raised me.
So growing up in South Phoenix was home and the mountain, and seeing the lights on South Mountain even 50 years ago. Those lights were there, and being able to go to the park, South Mountain Park, and play on the trails, or the park that's on 35th Avenue, just south of Dobbins. It's called Alvord Park. It used to be called Alvord Park. Now it's called Cesar Chavez Park. I remember when they dug out the ground for the lake.
7 Japanese-American families cultivated an enviable empire of luscious flower gardens with customers on both coasts.
Well, we started growing vegetables when we moved, got out of the camps. And my neighbor, Kishamas, started growing a few acres of flowers. And it looked pretty good to me, so I started growing flowers.
The Herd Corporation raised cattle, and laborers found frequent work in the nearby citrus gardens. This farming domain of South Phoenix had 2 sources to thank for its success: the ecological system provided by the sprawling South Mountains, and the Western Canal, which was built on ancient irrigation ditches dug by the Hohokam 2,000 years ago. At the end of the 1970s, local educator Verna McLean and businessman Merle Morris, along with the Greater South Mountain Business Association, proposed a new college campus in their community. Morris wrote that a college would serve as a catalyst for economic and social change. He and his colleagues predicted that growth in South Phoenix would match the predicted expansion of education in the metropolitan area. It seemed the perfect time for the Maricopa Community College District to build a college in South Phoenix. But policymakers disagreed. Back then, 2 government agencies oversaw the major functions of the Maricopa Community Colleges: the Arizona State Board of Directors for Community Colleges, which was dissolved in 2000, and the still operating Maricopa County Community College District Governing Board.
At the time, there was a state board of directors of community colleges, in addition to the local governing board. There was 15 members on the state board appointed by the governor. They had some minor supervisory approval responsibility, and we had to deal with them. When I came to work at Maricopa, Paul assigned me to work with the state board staff to make sure that we didn't get something done by our board only to be disapproved by the state board.
Fueled by racially charged stereotypes and misinformation, both boards generally agreed that no one in South Phoenix could possibly want to go to college. So building a campus there would be a waste of precious resources.
This one was the most controversial because their hand was forced. This wasn't from their sort of natural way of doing things. The formula at the time was that you put a community college in, and then you looked at the demography, 5 miles, a 5-mile diameter. And you looked at that demography and said, is a community college necessary? And if it is, I mean, will it serve the people? So that it was controversial. It was of whether you wanted to spend the money to build it and then operate it with the knowledge that you were never going to have 20,000 students.
At a meeting on April 18, 1978, the South Phoenix Citizens Advisory Committee convinced the Maricopa District Governing Board to support their dream. The board voted 3-2 in favor of a campus in South Phoenix. But even though the Maricopa Board relented to pressure and perseverance, politics and the state board still stood in the way. While the community was pushing for the college, they had some powerful allies at work in the district office. In 1977, 2 innovative educational giants, Dr. Paul Elsner and Dr. Alfredo G. de los Santos, Jr., were hired to serve as chancellor and vice chancellor, respectively. The 2 were committed to changing the tide in South's favor. They hired Dr. Raul Cardenas of Texas as the inaugural president of the still unnamed college. He was charged with making inroads with the state board. After the district governing board was won over at that 1978 meeting, the Arizona State Board continued to put up roadblocks. The state board still doubted the legitimacy of a community college down there.
3 members of the state board walked into the bathroom. I was washing my hands, and this guy said, did you hear what I heard? Those people at South Mountain want a community college. They don't need a community college down there.
A group of people went to the district to get this college started. There was an attitude about South Phoenix, and the attitude was that, oh, the people are happy down there. They don't want to be educated. No way.
Under sustained pressure, the state board finally agreed to put the college to a vote. To this day, residents firmly believe that at the last minute, the state board moved the meeting from nearby Tempe to Casa Grande, nearly 2 hours away from South Phoenix.
It was it's difficult. It's really an interesting story because there were folks who felt that the college was not going to make it here. Secondly, we had a state board of community colleges who had some concerns about that same thing, about enrollment, and didn't think that we were going to be able to get it started, and didn't think it was going to make it. So I immediately, as soon as I was appointed, I formed a citizens advisory committee to help me sort of navigate the political storm that I was facing. And we had some very influential people on the committee. Bottom line is, after quite a few tries, because we would go to the state board, the chancellor and I would Dr. Elsner and I would go to the board, present our idea, and it was almost like, okay, fine, but we still have concerns. And finally, it came down to the last minute that the last few weeks that we decided, so the state board said, we're going to make a decision such and such a day. And they used to meet here. But that particular meeting of the state board decided to move their meeting to Casa Grande, and to discourage community folks from attending, I'm sure. I'm not sure why, but that's what happened. That's my thinking. So I met with the advisory committee right away that evening before the meeting. I said, look, they've just moved the meeting to Casa Grande. We need to do something. It so happened that at the time that we were talking about that, Senator Alfredo Gutierrez was then state senator, and was also the Senate Majority Leader, was in place. So we called him. He immediately got on the phone, called Governor Babbitt, who was then the governor at the time. To make a long story short, when we went to Casa Grande, we were meeting at Central Arizona College. People were surprised when this whole group of folks showed up for the meeting. Because we were really interested in getting this moving. Governor Babbitt had made a few phone calls himself, because the state board was appointed by the governor, some of them, and some of them had been appointed by other governors.
Dozens of community members from South Phoenix showed up, along with local celebrities like State Senator Alfredo Gutierrez and Phoenix Councilman Calvin Good. They all showed up, and they made a strong case for a college in their neighborhood. And then, in the spring of 1979, after a series of negotiations and changes to the board leadership, and thanks to the influence of Governor Bruce Babbitt, the state board finally approved a campus in South Phoenix.
As soon as I got back to the office, I told Paul about it. And I said, there's trouble a-brewing, we'd better do something. And he immediately called Mr. Martinez, Bob Martinez, and we got in a conference call, the three of us, and the only solution that we could come up with was for us to go, for Martinez and I to go talk to Alfredo Gutierrez. So Alfredo Gutierrez from South Mountain. So we called, Martinez called, because I didn't know him, I have no standing. Paul didn't know him either. And he was this big president of the Senate. So we went, he had an office in I don't remember the exact location of the building, but it was an adobe building with a flat top, south of downtown Phoenix. It wasn't south of the river, but it was South Phoenix. And Robert and I explained to him what I just said, and he says, "What do you want me to do?" And we asked him to call the governor, Bruce Babbitt, his political body, and for him to talk to the board members, the state board members, and make sure that when the vote came that they would approve it. So that's what happened. The conversation went something like this. Alfredo had a little old telephone, but you could turn it on speaker. It had a little thing to the side, and he put it on speaker, and the conversation went something like this. "Hi, Mary, is Bruce there?" ask him to call me. So about 5 minutes later, the phone rings, and it was Bruce Babbitt calling Alfredo. And Alfredo described to the governor what we had just told him. And he said, "What do you want me to do?" And he says, call those guys and other members of the state board, that when the issue of South Mountain comes up, they should support it. So we waited there for about 20, 25 minutes, and the phone rang, and we could hear on the speakerphone, Babbitt said, "Alfredo, you got the votes."
So now, where to build the new college? South Phoenix was a general term for an area that spanned several miles, beginning near 48th Street in the east and reaching 51st Avenue in the west. Baseline Road, home to the Japanese flower gardens, provided an east-to-west artery and southern border, while the Salt River and Van Buren Avenue marked the northern reaches of South Phoenix. Farms, ranching property, and small, dilapidated neighborhoods stretched as far as the eye could see. A few potential locations were proposed, but the site at 24th Street and Baseline Road was selected when the Hurd Corporation offered the land for a reasonable rate. The campus was named South Mountain Community College in honor of its neighborhood, the mountains that bordered it, and the hopes that the college would become an anchor for the community.
Well, we were going to call it Citrus College initially. Yeah, because of the orange trees. There were a bunch of orange trees. And that was a big discussion. And then we decided to go to South Mountain because we needed to build up the area, and this would be helpful to the area. But Citrus College was one of the keys that we talked about, one of the names that we talked about.
In August 1979, before a group of excited community members, Dr. Raul Cardenas broke ground. In the background, a column of palm trees planted decades earlier by the Hurds reached skyward. Cardenas had his work cut out for him. He had to hire faculty and staff, oversee a major construction project, recruit students, and launch a brand new curriculum in a community that had previously lacked reasonable access to higher education. He also had to navigate policies that sought to undermine and marginalize his campus and his students. He had to do all of this before a single building was erected.
When I was hired, then I hired my academic dean and my student services dean and my business dean. At that time, it was called Director of Business Services. I developed a really good staff. I had a very good staff. And then I hired 4 people in the different disciplines, or major divisions, in the sciences, in the social science, communications. I think there was another area, I can't remember the other one. Anyway, so we had 4, and they in turn helped me develop the curriculum, and then they helped me in hiring the staff. So I think we started off like with about 10 staff and a lot of part-timers. And then we added people on as we went along.
Despite the chancellor's support, the governing board was still worried about low enrollment, and they didn't want to mount a bond election. So they determined that South would be built with temporary walls. This way, when the college inevitably failed, the cost to tear it down would be minimal.
When they built it, they used temporary walls so it could just collapse in case the college didn't make.
But Elsner, De Los Santos, and Cardenas circumvented that threat when they hired brilliant architect and icon Benny Gonzalez to design South Mountain Community College. Gonzalez's reputation made it less likely that the campus would ever be torn down. While overseeing construction, and in the college's first year, Cardenas hired his founding faculty, Julie Birch and Jane McGrath in English, Eula Birch in sciences, Lorraine Calbo and Joseph Parham in counseling, and Richard Morales in history. For the first 2 years, South Mountain was a college without a campus. As construction continued, trailers housed faculty and administrative offices, while classes and registration took place at nearby Holy Family Catholic Parish and local elementary schools.
The first day I got here, again, we're in trailers. And I'm saying, where are we going to hold classes? The church. The church. Okay. Right over here, it's gone now, was a chicken farm. And it stunk to high heaven. It stunk to high heaven. Okay, so that's one challenge. And then there was no air conditioning in the church. This is October in Arizona. It's hotter than hell. So they bring in these huge fans, and you had to shout to be heard because they made a ton of noise. I mean, I speak very loud when I teach, when I used to teach. I don't think they heard me.
That time we didn't have this facility, so I taught in the church, in the chapel. And so people, one day, they didn't tell us, but one day there was a funeral in the chapel, so here was the coffin and all this, and I was getting ready to have English class. And no one had told us that. So then, of course, all the jokes started flying. Oh, people are dying to get into Jackie's class. Or people are dying to get out of Jackie's class. Or it's a deadly environment. So, you know, those were the days, but I was right there. So I tell my students, well, Jesus is right back there.
On a warm morning in August 1981, Dr. Raul Cardenas stood facing southwest, waiting for his students to arrive. Though SMCC had been operating for a couple of years, this was his first day of school at a brand new campus. South was built on a 45-degree angle, perhaps to pay homage to the South Mountain Preserve and the canals just off in the distance. For that moment, there was just a man and a mountain. But within minutes, he was surrounded by students, and the community's vision was realized. That day, a young man walked onto campus. It was his first day at South Mountain Community College, too, and he was greeted by Dr. Cardenas, who asked him if he could help point the man to his classroom. That young man was Jerome Garrison, the new music teacher, and Cardenas had mistaken him for a student. Over the course of his prolific career, Garrison would earn his doctorate, initiate the annual Student Community Performance of the Messiah, and oversee the construction of an award-winning performing arts center, all at South Mountain Community College.
That was in 81 when I walked in, and Raul Cardenas was standing out there, and he was just all looking professional, and he was shaking everybody's hand who walked by. And I walked up, and he said, "Hey, young man." And he shook my hand. He said, "How can I help you?" And I said, "Well, I'm here looking for the adjunct faculty meetings." And he started laughing. He said, "I thought you were one of our students." He said, "It's down that way like that." And so then.
Working at South was like being part of one big, happy family.
I chose this college, but this was, when I graduated, this was where I wanted to teach.
When I taught here as a part-time instructor, the 2 years before I got hired as full-time, I was also volunteered as a volleyball coach. And so I just felt like South was the place where I was supposed to be. I still feel that way today, and I've never considered leaving.
But of course, we had our share of challenges. In 1984, a climate of racial rivalry among some staff spilled over and impacted students. Claims were made to the Federal Immigration and Naturalization Service, today's ICE, regarding the distribution of loans to Mexicans and Mexican Americans. INS raided the financial aid department, causing long-term legal and emotional damage to the affected students. In 1986, a marital dispute made national headlines when a South employee attempted to poison his wife at her off-campus workplace and ultimately killed an unrelated person in the process. And in 1996, tragedy struck when 2 baseball players were killed in a devastating car accident on the way to a game.
So they had a van accident and it tipped over and 2 of our players were killed. And it was really difficult. You know, we were in the middle of the season. I met, you know, I was interviewed because I was the AD. I was interviewed by the Republic. And so we had a meeting, and all the players said in memory of the 2 people that were lost that they wanted to continue. And we had a memorial in the gym, And so it was a big thing.
The injuries that I sustained, it was a massive traumatic brain injury, I lost 3 days before the accident. So I remember nothing except the last game that I actually pitched in, and that was 3 days before the accident.
While the entire campus mourned the loss, teammates and coaches got tattoos to remember the lost young men. We've faced budget cuts and low enrollment in some years. And like all community colleges in Arizona, we're now navigating a future without any state financial support. And yet, it seems that, born of our community amid controversy, South will clearly persevere. We're celebrating 40 years of academics, innovation, and community service.
I do love this place. I care for the people I work with because this is my family. You know, it's my extended family. So everyone's life is important. And to be your best self, that's really important. When I work with people, when I work with students, it's just like, just be your best self. Love who you are and find what you love and just do it with all your heart. Because you're going to live a great life if you can find that. And that's important.
South Mountain Community College. Born of community. Anchored in community. Honoring community. Humble origins. Heroic legacy.